The night air carried the faint hum of the railway tracks, a low, metallic groan that seemed to vibrate against the earth itself. The singer stood there, her breath ragged, her dress torn at the hem from running through the brush. A torchlight flickered. Far behind, those men were still after her. She could hear their mocking laughter on the wind, the cruel jeers of men who had never once clapped for her songs, only leered at her stage presence. Her name was Eliza Hart, a woman whose voice could soften even the hardest hearts, at least. That's what she once believed. But this town was different. These people didn't want her ballads or tender melodies. They wanted spectacle, scandal, something to laugh at. When she had refused the drunken advances of a wealthy patron, whispers spread like wildfire, twisting her into a villain in her own story. By dusk, she had been driven from the saloon stage where she once sang with pride. Now, cornered by shadows, Eliza's boots slipped against the gravel by the tracks. The rails glistened like two thin blades in the moonlight, a silent warning. And then she stumbled. Her ankle gave way, and for one breathless moment, she lay sprawled across the cold iron. In the distance, the mournful cry of a train whistle cut through the air. Panic clawed at her chest. She tried to rise, but her ankle throbbed, refusing to bear her weight. The men's voices grew nearer. Her heart pounded not just from the approaching train, but from the cruel certainty that if the iron beast didn't take her, those men would. She clutched at the rail, her voice breaking into the night. Please, please, someone. Save me. Her words were desperate, unshaped by pride. The sound carried, but she didn't know to whom until she saw him. A tall figure stepped from the shadows at the tree line, where the moon painted his outline in silver. Broad-shouldered, lean, a hat pulled low over his brow. He didn't rush toward her. He simply stood there, watching. For a fleeting second, she thought she'd conjured him from her own fear, a ghost, or maybe an angel. Then the whistle grew louder, closer, vibrating the ground beneath her body. The light of the engine burst over the horizon. She screamed again, raw, pleading, "Save me." Her voice cracked, almost swallowed by the roar. "I'll be your wife. I'll do whatever you ask. Just please don't let me die." And in that moment, he moved. The stranger lunged forward, boots striking sparks from the gravel as he crossed the tracks. He bent, strong hands gripping her shoulders, and with one swift pull tore her free of the rails. They tumbled into the dirt, her body colliding against his as the train thundered past. So close the wind burned her cheeks. For a long moment, Eliza lay against him, chest heaving, unable to speak. The heat of his body steadied her shaking, and yet his silence unsettled her. She tilted her head back to see his face shadowed, unreadable. Though his eyes caught the moonlight like flint, she remembered her desperate promise, the words that had spilled from her mouth in terror. "I'll be your wife. I'll do whatever you ask." Shame rushed over her, but before she could speak, he let her go. Standing as though saving her had been nothing more than instinct, he looked down at her, his voice quiet, steady. "You don't owe me anything, singer." The words cut through the night like a knife. He turned as if to leave, and Eliza's heart twisted. She had begged for her life, offered everything she had left to a stranger, and now he was walking away, leaving her with nothing but the echo of her own plea. But something inside her knew this was not the last she would see of him. The silence that followed the train's thunder was almost unbearable. Eliza pressed her palms to the dirt, the world still rattling inside her bones. The stranger's footsteps were already crunching against the gravel, carrying him toward the tree line as though nothing had happened. "Wait." Her voice tore from her throat, half a command, half a plea. He stopped, but didn't turn. The brim of his hat shadowed his face, his body rigid in the moonlight. For a moment, she feared he would keep walking. Her heart sank at the thought of being left alone with the echo of her own desperate promise. The train fading and the hunters drawing closer. She pulled herself to her feet. wincing at the pain in her ankle, but pride forced her upright. "You can't just leave me here," she said, louder now. "Those men will," she swallowed hard, unable to finish the sentence. Finally, he turned. His eyes met hers, sharp and unflinching. "You shouldn't make promises you don't mean," he said. His voice was low, steady, and carried a weight that pressed down on her chest. Heat flushed her cheeks. Shame prickled at her skin, but anger quickly followed. "I meant every word," she shot back. "If it meant saving my life, I'd have given you anything." "I still would." His jaw tightened, but he said nothing. He studied her as though weighing her soul against something only he could see. Then, with a shake of his head, he muttered, "I don't need a wife. Especially not one bought with fear." Her stomach twisted. Bought with fear? That was what he thought of her words. She wanted to tell him he was wrong, that she wasn't some shallow, trembling woman. But the truth was, she had begged, and she had offered herself like coin tossed on a table. The crunch of laughter drifted from beyond the trees, the man. Closer now, searching. She spun, panic rising again, but the stranger was already moving, brushing past her. "Stay close," he said simply. It wasn't a promise, but it was something. She limped after him, clutching her torn skirts to keep from stumbling. He moved like a shadow, deliberate and quiet, leading her away from the open tracks and deeper into the thickets where the moonlight barely touched the ground. The smell of pine and damp earth closed around them, muffling the distant shouts. For several long minutes they moved in silence, broken only by the occasional snap of twigs beneath her boots. At last, when the voices had faded, Eliza dared to speak. "You never told me your name." "Didn't think you'd need it," he replied without looking. Back. Her lips pressed into a thin line. "You saved my life." "I think that gives me the right to know." He stopped then, glancing at her over his shoulder. For the first time, she caught a glimpse of something other than coldness in his gaze, a flicker of weariness. Like a man who had carried too many burdens alone. "Cole? Emmy Cole," he said finally. Cole. The name settled into her mind with surprising weight. "Thank you, Cole," she whispered, and meant it. He looked away quickly, starting forward again. "Don't thank me yet." "You're not safe," her breath caught. She wanted to ask more, but something in his voice told her not to press. Instead, she limped in silence, her heart pounding with every step. She had promised herself to this man in a moment of terror, believing it would be her last chance to survive. Yet now, walking in his shadow, she realized survival was only the beginning. Cole had saved her body from the train's iron teeth. But the question remained, what would he do with her soul? The woods swallowed them whole, the night air damp and thick with the scent of pine. Eliza's ankle throbbed with every step, but she bit down on the pain, determined not to slow him. Cole walked ahead like he belonged to the shadows, his movements soundless, his head always turning as if measuring every sound in the dark. At last, when they reached a small clearing beside a trickling creek, he stopped. "Rest," he said simply, dropping his saddlebag onto the ground. Eliza sank onto a flat stone, brushing sweat from her brow. The run, the fear, the train, they all caught up to her at once, and she pressed her palms into her face to hold back the sobs. But one broke free, sharp and trembling. She expected him to ignore it. Instead, his voice came low, rough around the edges. "Crying makes noise." "Noise gets you caught." Her head jerked up, stung. "So I should just sit here like a rock? After what happened back there?" He didn't answer at first. He crouched by the creek, filling a tin cup with water, his shoulders tense beneath the faded fabric of his shirt. Finally, he stood and handed it to her. "Drink, you'll think clearer." She took it, but her eyes narrowed. "You speak like a man who's always running." Something flickered across his face. He didn't deny it. He sat across from her, leaning against a tree, his hat pulled low. I've had my share of enemies. Eliza studied him, her curiosity burning stronger than her fear. Why? What did you do? For a long moment, the only sound was the creak. She thought he wouldn't answer, but then his voice came, quiet as a confession. I was a soldier once. Fought for a cause that wasn't mine. When the smoke cleared, I didn't belong anywhere. Men I thought were brothers turned into killers. And he stopped, jaw tightening. I walked away. Been walking ever since. His words painted pictures she didn't want to see. Blood. Betrayal, a man wandering with no home but the weight of his past. She swallowed hard, her voice soft. So that's why you don't want me. You think you've got nothing left to give. His eyes snapped up, hard as steel. You don't know me. No, she admitted, meeting his gaze without flinching. But I want to. The space between them grew heavy. For the first time since she'd met him, he looked unsettled not by danger, but by her persistence. He rubbed a hand across his stubbled jaw, muttering, "Your trouble, Singer." Before she could reply, the sound of snapping twigs echoed from the trees. Both their heads whipped around. Cole was on his feet in an instant, his revolver drawn. Eliza froze. Her pulse hammering. Voices drifted closer, the men who had chased her along the tracks. She recognized their tones, mocking, slurred with drink, brimming with the hunt. Cole motioned her down, his eyes sharp, warning her to stay quiet. She crouched behind the stone, her breath shallow. The voices passed just beyond the tree line, no more than 30 paces away. She couldn't veg on far, one sneered. Maybe the train got her. Would have heard the scream, another replied with a laugh. Nah, she's out here somewhere. And when we find her, his words trailed into something vile that made Eliza's stomach twist. Cole's hand clenched tighter on the revolver. For one tense heartbeat, Eliza thought he would step out and kill them all. But instead, he stayed perfectly still, a predator waiting for the right moment. At last, the voices faded, the men moving down the ridge. Silence returned, heavy and taut. Cole lowered the revolver, but his jaw was tight with restraint. He turned to her, his voice low and urgent. They'll keep hunting. You stay with me, you'll draw their fire. You leave. His eyes narrowed. You won't last the night. Eliza's throat tightened. The choice was clear. Life with him, dangerous and uncertain. Or death alone. She swallowed, her voice steady despite the fear. Then I'll stay. Whether you want me or not. Cole's stare lingered on her, dark and unreadable. For a moment, she thought he'd send her away. But then, to her surprise, he gave the faintest nod. Fine, he said. But you follow my rules. Or the rails won't be what kills you. The first light of dawn crept through the trees, painting the forest in muted gold and shadow. Eliza stirred, stiff from sleeping on the cold earth, but her resolve had hardened overnight. She had promised herself she would survive, and if that meant staying close to Cole, learning whatever he demanded, she would do it. Cole had already been awake for hours. She found him by the creek, skimming a flat stone across the water with a precision that reminded her of the soldiers he had once spoken about. His movements were smooth, disciplined, yet his eyes never left the tree line, scanning for threats like a hawk. You're up, he said without turning. His voice was calm but edged with warning. I need to help, she said, clutching her knees. I can do something. Anything. Cole's lips pressed into a thin line. You can't shoot, and you can't track as quietly as you think. She flinched, but didn't argue. Instead, she took a deep breath. Then tell me what I can do. He finally looked at her, his gaze weighing her like one might test a blade. After a long pause, he muttered, Fine, gather firewood. Keep the camp tidy. Watch the perimeter. Don't make noise. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Eliza nodded and set to work, gathering dry twigs and splitting small logs. Her fingers blistered, her arms ached, but she kept moving, determined to prove herself. Each rustle of leaves, each snapping twig, she reminded herself to move deliberately, silently. As though the forest itself was holding its breath. As the morning wore on, she observed Cole. He wasn't cruel, but he was exacting, his expectations rigid. He taught her how to bend low when approaching the water, how to use shadows to cover movement, how to sense danger before it reached her. Every correction stung her pride, yet she endured. "You're not a soldier," he said finally, watching her fumble while crossing a small creek. "You think with your heart, not your head. That's fine for a singer. But out here, thinking with your heart gets you killed." Eliza swallowed hard, though she refused to look away. "Maybe I'm not a soldier, but I can learn." Cole's gaze lingered on her, sharp, and for a brief moment something softened behind his eyes. "Maybe," he muttered, and then he turned back to the trees, scanning the horizon. Hours passed. The men who had chased her had vanished for now, but Eliza knew Cole's words weren't idle. Danger lurked everywhere, and every day in the wilderness demanded vigilance. She began to anticipate his movements, handing him supplies before he asked, preparing a small fire, even mimicking the way he moved through the underbrush. By afternoon, Cole finally allowed her to accompany him on a short scouting run. She stumbled once, nearly giving herself away, but his hand steadied her. "Keep your eyes open," he whispered, and she nodded, feeling a thrill she didn't understand, half fear, half excitement. For the first time, Eliza realized survival was more than avoiding death. It was about trust, about learning to rely on someone other than herself. And perhaps, somewhere in the shadows of this dangerous world, a bond was forming between them, one forged in fire, fear, and the unspoken promise that neither would abandon the other. As they returned to the camp, the forest now quiet in the fading light, Eliza felt a new kind of strength. The singer's voice that once captivated halls might never again be heard by the world. But she understood now, survival required more than song. It required courage, patience, and a willingness to follow the man who had saved her life, not because she begged, but because he chose to. Cole glanced at her, eyebrow raised. "You're learning," he said, almost like a warning. Eliza smiled, tired but triumphant. "I'll keep learning," she replied, "even if it kills me." For the first time, she felt that perhaps the rails hadn't just been the place of her desperation, they had been the beginning of her salvation. The days in the forest began to blur together. Each morning, Eliza woke with the ache of her muscles and the sharp tang of fear still clinging to her. Yet beneath the exhaustion, there was a growing determination. Survival alone was no longer enough. She wanted to be useful to Cole, to prove that her life wasn't only worth saving, but that she could contribute in ways that mattered. Cole remained distant, as always. His eyes scanned every tree line, every shadow, as if expecting ambushes at any moment. Yet slowly, he began to allow her closer, first to pass supplies, then to observe his scouting routines, and finally to follow him on short patrols. Each day tested her patience and her resolve, but she accepted his harsh lessons without complaint. "You need to think 2 steps ahead," he said one morning, crouched behind a fallen log as they observed a distant ridge. "Not just what you see, but what could happen in the next heartbeat." Eliza nodded, the words sinking into her like stone. She remembered the train, remembered the moment she had offered herself in desperation. That vulnerability had been frightening, but now, she realized, it could be channeled into vigilance. Later that day, as they returned to camp, Cole spotted something unusual, a faint smoke curling from a distant slope, almost imperceptible against the pale afternoon sky. He froze, hand lifted in a silent signal. Eliza's pulse raced. "Bandits?" she whispered. "Possibly," he muttered. "Stay low." Together they moved through the underbrush, silent shadows against the forest floor. Cole's movements were precise, economical. Eliza mirrored him, careful not to stumble, careful not to betray her presence. As they approached, the smoke grew thicker. It wasn't a threat. It was a small campfire, abandoned but fresh. Cole inspected it, eyes narrowed. Someone's been here recently. Could be scouts, could be hunters. Either way, we're lucky they left without seeing us. Eliza stepped forward impulsively. I can help, she said. I can track their path. I've watched how you move, you taught me enough. Cole's gaze met hers, sharp with surprise. You want to? I need to, she replied, steady despite the fear gnawing at her chest. He studied her for a long moment, then nodded. Fine, show me. Eliza crouched low, eyes scanning the ground. She traced broken twigs, the faint indentation of footprints in soft soil, and the barely visible smear of ash. Her fingers brushed the earth like a painter with a canvas. Slowly, methodically, she followed the trail, feeling the tension in her body transform into focus. Cole walked beside her, silent but alert, his revolver ready. When she paused, he didn't reprimand, he observed, watched her instincts. By the time they returned to the clearing, Cole's expression had softened, just slightly, as though he had glimpsed a part of her worth beyond desperation. You've got an eye for this, he admitted quietly. Better than I expected? Eliza felt a surge of pride. I told you, she said, her voice firm. I can learn. I can help. You don't have to do everything alone. For the first time, Cole looked at her differently, not merely as someone he had saved, not as a liability, but as an ally, someone he could rely on. The moment was subtle, almost invisible, yet it shifted the dynamic between them. She realized survival had been only the first step. Now trust and usefulness were the currency she needed to earn. As night fell, the forest settling into quiet shadows, Eliza sat by the fire, exhausted but triumphant. Cole watched her for a long while, eyes softened, yet still wary. You're proving yourself, he said finally. And I'll keep proving myself, she replied, meeting his gaze without hesitation. Because I want to live. And because I want to stand by your side, not behind you. Cole didn't respond, but the brief nod he gave her was enough. In that small gesture, Eliza felt a spark of hope, a fragile, dangerous, but undeniable bond forming in the wilderness, one that neither fire nor fear could easily extinguish. The forest had grown darker, denser, as they ventured further from the river clearing. Every step seemed heavier, every shadow longer. Eliza felt the tension coil inside her, the constant awareness of danger sharpening her senses. She had learned to move like Cole, to anticipate, to observe, but tonight something gnawed at the edges of her confidence, a feeling she couldn't name. Cole led the way, silent and precise. The air was thick with the scent of pine and damp earth, but there was another scent too, faint but unmistakable. Smoke, fresh and acrid, like a fire burning too close. He froze, lifting a hand. Stay down. And don't breathe too loud. Eliza crouched, heart hammering. The memory of the train, of being pinned on the rails, surged forward, fueling both fear and determination. This time, she would not be helpless. Through the underbrush, they crept closer to the source. Ahead, a small clearing flickered with orange light. Cole pressed her down behind a fallen log, his hand firm on her shoulder. Bandits, he whispered. Foolish or desperate. Either way, they're armed. Eliza swallowed, nodding. She had tracked them before, but now it was different. They were not distant marks on the ground. They were real, dangerous men, with intent and fire in their eyes. Cole turned to her, eyes sharp. You follow my lead. Do exactly what I do. One mistake. His jaw tightened. And it could be the end. I understand, she whispered. The men were busy. arguing over a stolen cache of goods, unaware of the pair watching them from the shadows. Cole motioned her forward, silently pointing to a tree that would give her vantage without exposure. Eliza climbed, careful to keep her balance, every muscle taut. From her perch, she could see the men clearly, and her stomach twisted at the sight of their weapons. Suddenly, one of the bandits lifted his head, sniffing the air. Eliza froze, thinking her heart would burst from her chest. Cole's voice, low and commanding, broke the tension. "Get down," she obeyed instantly. Together, they moved like shadows, circling the camp, cutting off the bandits' only escape. Cole's strategy was precise, and she did her part, signaling when a man's back was turned, watching the others like a hawk. When Cole finally made his move, it was swift and calculated. He disarmed the nearest bandit with a single strike, using the momentum to knock another off balance. Eliza, following his cues, grabbed a fallen branch, brandishing it like a weapon. She didn't strike, but the bandit's hesitation was enough for Cole to finish the confrontation. Breathing heavily, they stood in the clearing, the remaining men fleeing into the forest. Cole's revolver still in hand, he finally turned to her. His expression was unreadable, but his eyes held a flicker of something she had never seen before: pride. Grudging and careful. "You didn't freeze," he said, his voice low. "You stayed with me. That's more than most could do." Eliza's chest swelled with a mixture of relief and triumph. "I told you I could learn," she said softly, "and I wanted to help. I wasn't going to run." Cole looked at her, his gaze lingering, sharp but not cold. For the first time, she felt a connection deeper than mere survival, a bond forged in fear, courage, and shared danger. "You've got guts," he muttered, almost grudgingly. "And maybe, just maybe, you're more than a singer screaming for her life on the rails." Eliza smiled faintly, still catching her breath. "Maybe I am," she said. The forest was silent again, but the night felt different. They had survived together, and for the first time, the wilderness no longer seemed like a threat that would always overtake her. With Cole at her side, and with her own courage rising, she realized that life was no longer just about running, it was about standing, even in the face of danger, and proving that she could belong, even here, even with him. The forest was quieter than usual the next morning, a stillness that made Eliza uneasy. The previous night's confrontation with the bandits had left her adrenaline buzzing, but it also left a spark of confidence he had never felt before. She was no longer the desperate singer screaming on the rails. She had proven herself, step by step, under Cole's watchful eye. Yet something gnawed at her. A secret she had buried deep beneath her fear and shame, the reason she had been running. The reason she had offered herself in desperation hovered at the edges of her mind. She had survived the night, but she knew that her past was not done with her yet. Cole broke the silence first, crouching by the creek, sharpening his knife with meticulous care. "We need to move," he said, his voice low and steady. "Those men will regroup. They won't forget last night." Eliza nodded, but the words she had kept hidden pressed at her throat. She had never told anyone, not even on stage, not even in the quiet moments of loneliness, why she had been fleeing the town, why she had almost given herself to a stranger on the rails. As they packed up the minimal supplies they carried, her resolve hardened. She would tell him. If he had saved her life, perhaps he deserved to know the truth. The opportunity came as they walked through a narrow gorge, the sunlight barely touching the ground. Cole led, scanning every shadow, while Eliza followed, limping slightly but with determination. She took a deep breath, voice trembling but firm. "Cole, there's something I need to tell you," she began. He glanced back, eyebrow raised, his hand never leaving the grip of his revolver. "Go on," he said cautiously. She hesitated, the words bitter on her tongue. I wasn't just running because of those men. There's more," A mistake I made in my past. Something I've hidden. And when I begged you on the tracks, it wasn't just fear. I was desperate because of everything I'd lost, everything I thought I couldn't recover. Cole's expression didn't change, but the tension in his posture tightened. And you think telling me this now will change anything? He asked, tone guarded. I don't know, she admitted. But I can't keep pretending I'm just a helpless singer. I need you to know the truth about me. About why I ran. About why I begged. For a long moment, he said nothing. The gorge seemed to close around them, the air thick with the weight of unspoken words. Then, finally, he exhaled slowly, almost a whisper. You were scared, he said simply. And you acted out of desperation. That doesn't make you weak, it makes you human. You didn't know me. You didn't know anyone. Eliza's eyes filled with tears, a mixture of relief and lingering shame. So, you're not angry? Cole's lips twitched, a fleeting hint of a smile. Angry? No, but I do expect you to stay alive. And I do expect honesty from now on. She nodded, feeling a lightness she hadn't known in months. Finally, someone understood the terror she had carried, the mistakes she had made not with judgment, but with practicality and caution. They moved forward together, the bond between them shifting subtly. Survival had been their first shared challenge. Trust, their next. And now, with secrets revealed and fears admitted, a deeper connection began to form, one built not only on life and death, but on honesty and shared understanding. As they reached a small clearing where the sunlight broke through, Eliza realized that the tracks, the train, and the desperate plea that had brought Cole into her life were just the beginning. The wilderness, danger, and her own courage were shaping her into someone stronger, and perhaps someone who could finally claim a place by his side without fear. The forest seemed alive that morning, every rustle and chirp echoing in the stillness. Eliza moved quietly beside Cole, her muscles sore from days of constant vigilance, but her spirits stronger than ever. The trust between them, fragile yet persistent, had grown since her confession. She had shared her darkest moment, and he had not turned away. Now she sensed that he, too, carried burdens he had yet to reveal. They came to a shaded clearing near a small creek, the sunlight filtering in patches through the canopy. Cole set down his gear and crouched to inspect the water. For a moment, he seemed lost in thought, his eyes distant. Eliza waited, unsure whether to speak, but curiosity nudged her forward. Cole, you've never really talked about why you left your life behind. The soldiers, the battles. You said it hurt, but you never said how. He tensed, his fingers gripping the knife as though it anchored him to the present. It's not something easy to explain, he muttered. You don't have to explain it if it's too painful, she said gently. But I want to understand you. Not just the man who saved me, but the man you are beyond the guns, the forest, the silence. Cole's gaze flicked to her, sharp yet unreadable. For a long moment, he said nothing, studying the ripples of the creek. Then, quietly, almost hesitantly, he began. I grew up thinking I could change the world, he said. Joined the army believing in causes and honor. But the world, it's not honorable. Men you trust can turn on you in a heartbeat. Friends become enemies. Orders that seem right in theory lead to blood in your hands. Eliza listened intently, her heart tightening. She could see the weight of his memories pressing down on him, the shadows he carried. Even in the daylight, I left, he continued, his voice low, because I couldn't live with what I'd done, and I couldn't stay with the men I'd become. I wandered, took odd jobs, hunted, kept to the shadows. Anything to stay alive and avoid the past catching up with me. Eliza's throat tightened. And yet, you saved me. You put yourself at risk. Why? Cole's eyes met hers, dark and unwavering. Because you were in danger. Because no one else would act. And I suppose I wanted to believe that maybe, for once, I could do something right. She reached out, tentatively, placing a hand on his arm. Cole, you're doing right now what you couldn't do before. Saving me, trusting me, letting someone be near you. That takes courage, too. His jaw tightened, but the tension in his shoulders eased slightly. For the first time, he allowed himself a small, almost imperceptible nod. Maybe, he said softly. The moment stretched, fragile and profound. For the first time, Eliza felt she wasn't only learning from him, he was learning to trust again, to accept another human being into the fortress he had built around himself. Cole, she said gently, we're stronger together. You don't have to carry everything alone anymore. I'll watch your back. You watch mine. He studied her, the hard edges of his face softening. You've got guts, he said, a rare smile brushing his lips. And heart, maybe. Maybe that's enough for both of us. For the first time, Eliza felt the forest less like a cage and more like a world they could navigate together. Their bond had shifted from necessity to something deeper, a mutual trust forged in danger, honesty and shared survival. As they prepared to move again, side by side, she realized that both their pasts were scars. Yes, but also lessons. And perhaps in the shadows of the forest, amidst the looming threats and the constant dangers, there was a chance not just for survival, but for connection, for healing, and maybe even for love. The day began with a tension that hung heavier than the morning mist. The forest felt alive in a way that was different from before, a subtle warning beneath the chirping of birds and rustle of leaves. Eliza walked beside Cole, every sense alert, every muscle coiled and ready. She had learned to read the forest like he did, to anticipate threats before they arrived. Yet today, something deeper stirred in the shadows. By mid-morning, the danger announced itself. Smoke rose from a ridge in the distance, thicker and more purposeful than the remnants of abandoned fires they had tracked before. Cole stiffened instantly, his hand tightening around his revolver. They found us, he said quietly. Or they're scouting. Either way, it's no coincidence. Eliza swallowed, heart pounding. Bandits? Or worse? Cole didn't answer. Instead, he motioned for her to stay low as he crept ahead. She mirrored his movements, silent and deliberate. Every step was measured, every snap of a twig a potential death sentence. They reached the crest of a small hill and peered down. A group of men had set up a temporary camp, armed and alert. Their eyes swept the forest, clearly searching for tracks. Eliza's stomach twisted. Their numbers were greater than any threat they had faced before. Cole's gaze met hers, hard and unyielding. We don't fight them head-on. You follow me. Every move. Trust me completely. I do, she whispered, her voice steady despite the fear. They descended carefully, using shadows for cover. The men didn't notice them at first, but a snapped branch betrayed Eliza's presence. Instantly, shouts rang out, and the bandits turned toward them. Cole acted without hesitation, firing his revolver to force them to scatter while simultaneously signaling Eliza to flank left. Her pulse surged as she ran, heart hammering, but she remembered his lessons focus. Patience, use the environment. She ducked behind trees, rolling over fallen logs, keeping low and using the underbrush as cover. Her movements were fluid now, almost instinctive. Cole fought with precision, disarming and subduing the nearest men with movements that were both lethal and controlled. Eliza realized then that her survival was no longer about her own life alone. She was part of a team, part of a unit forged in fire and fear. The bandits, realizing they were outmaneuvered, began to retreat. Cole and Eliza pursued cautiously, driving them away from their immediate path, ensuring no one could follow them back to their hidden camp. When the forest fell silent again, Eliza sank to her knees, breathing heavily, her hands shaking from exertion. Cole approached, expression unreadable but eyes softer than usual. "You did well," he said simply. Eliza looked up at him, surprise and pride mingling in her chest. I didn't freeze. I followed your lead," Cole nodded. "Exactly. And that makes all the difference. Fear can kill, hesitation can kill, but you kept moving." The adrenaline that had propelled her through the confrontation began to fade, replaced by a quiet awareness of something more profound. The danger had tested not only their skills but their trust. They had moved as one, relied entirely on each other, and survived. Eliza realized that the bond between them was no longer fragile. It had been tempered, like steel in the fire of shared danger. She had begun as a desperate singer clinging to life, and now she was something more, a partner, a comrade, someone Cole could depend on as much as he depended on her. Cole stood beside her, looking into the forest, ever vigilant. For the first time, Eliza sensed that he wasn't just watching for threats in the trees. He was beginning to watch for her too, as if her presence had become as vital as the forest itself. And as the sun dipped toward the horizon, painting the sky in gold and crimson, Eliza understood that the trials of survival had forged something new between them: trust, courage, and perhaps the beginnings of a bond that neither danger nor darkness could destroy. The forest was eerily silent that evening, the golden light of dusk casting long shadows between the trees. Cole and Eliza moved cautiously, every sound amplified in the tense stillness. They had survived countless threats together, but the bandits from before had returned, more numerous and desperate than ever. Cole's hand hovered over his revolver, his eyes scanning the tree line with unerring focus. Eliza stayed close, muscles coiled and ready, heart pounding with anticipation. She had grown since that first night on the rails, stronger, braver, more aware, but she knew this would be their ultimate test. "Stay close," Cole murmured. "They'll strike soon." Eliza nodded, her gaze never leaving him. In that moment, she realized the bond between them had shifted entirely. This wasn't just survival anymore. It was trust, loyalty, and perhaps something deeper neither had fully admitted. From the ridge above, the bandits appeared, moving quickly, eager to reclaim what they thought was theirs. Cole moved first, firing his revolver with deadly precision. Eliza mirrored his movements, ducking and weaving through the trees, using the lessons he had drilled into her over weeks. She threw rocks, tripped hidden snares, and guided Cole around obstacles with keen awareness of the terrain. The battle escalated quickly. One bandit broke from the group, aiming directly at Eliza. Her breath caught, but reflexively she dove to the side, narrowly avoiding a bullet. Cole's hand shot out, gripping her shoulder, steadying her. "Focus!" He barked, and she did, channeling fear into clear, sharp action. Together, they moved as one, their movements synchronized, instinctive. Each step, each maneuver, was an unspoken conversation of trust and reliance. The bandits began to falter, unable to match the precision and coordination. Finally, the last of the attackers fled, disappearing into the shadows of the forest. Cole and Eliza stood panting, the tension slowly ebbing. They were bruised and battered, but victorious. Eliza lowered herself to her knees, hands trembling. We did it," she whispered, disbelief and relief mingling. Cole stood over her, chest heaving, eyes softening. He extended a hand. Hesitant at first, she took it, and he pulled her to her feet. For a long moment, they stood together, side by side, the forest around them quiet once more. "You've come a long way," he said quietly, "from screaming on the rails to standing here. Strong, brave, alive." Eliza felt a warmth spread through her chest. "I couldn't have done it without you," she admitted. "You taught me how to survive, how to fight, how to trust. You saved more than my life, Cole. You saved me from fear. For the first time, he allowed himself to smile, faint but genuine. And you saved me from walking this life alone, he said, his voice low but certain. I thought I could survive in the shadows, but you've changed that. You've changed me. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting a fiery glow across the forest. They stood there, together, breathing in the crisp evening air. The rails where Eliza had first begged for her life were far behind them, a memory of desperation transformed into triumph. Cole finally took her hand in both of his, a gesture of trust and commitment. We face danger together, he said, from now on. You don't have to beg anymore. You're not alone, Eliza smiled, tears of relief and joy slipping down her cheeks. I won't run anymore, she promised. Not from the world. And not from us. And in that moment, beneath the twilight sky, the singer who had once screamed on the rails found not just safety, but belonging, courage, and a bond forged in the fires of fear, trust, and shared survival. The forest, once a place of shadows and threat, became a witness to their triumph and the beginning of something neither had dared to hope for, a life together, free from fear, bound by trust, and strengthened by love.